Kum Len Labak Gemara, Erev Shabbos Shuvah. We're on Daf Yud Amud Aleph. We're in the first wide line. Rabbi Yechon made a comment because of a certain question. He decided to swap the names around. That Beis Hillel was the one who was more stringent than Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel is the one who says that you cannot move a ladder from one chicken coop to another one, and you can just tilt it within the same chicken coop from one level to another. And Beis Shammai is the one who's lenient. Something was bothering him. So we want to know what's bothering him, and we're going through a number of mishnahs where Beis Shammai seems to be the one that's stricter, and in contrast, in our first mishnah where he says that Simchas Yom Tov is paramount, and he allows you to shecht an animal and to have a shovel there to dig out sand. Sounds like he's suspending some of the laws for Simchas Yom Tov, and then later on we find an argument where it's the other way around. The Shammai is the one who prevents something because he's now concerned about Simchas Yom Tov. Meanwhile, every single question that we had, we showed there was a difference between the first mishnah, because it's limited only to a case where the shovel's already in the sand and the sand is already all already crumbled up, and there's no digging there, and there's no question of really crushing it and so on. But other cases, there are issues. So up to the Gemara will continue. Ela I kasha ha kasha. If you have a question, this is the question. Beis Shammai says, and these are all mishnahs that we will learn in the next few days. Ein noisin esa or. If you shecht an animal, then you strip the hide, you don't place the hide on the ground, leaving the head dirt, and people are trampling on them, because when you tan the hide, part of it is that you trample on it and you press it out. Don't place it on the ground where the number of people are walking there. Nor don't suspend it on a peg or something else, again, to air out. The only way you're allowed to do that is if there's some meat hanging there, so otherwise it's muktzah. So if there's some meat still attached to the hide, then you can hang it up. And however, Beis Hillel allows it. And the reason why Beis Hillel allows it, what we understood it is because Simchas Yom Tov. Because if you're not going to let him do anything with the hide, why would he shecht the animal and cause himself incur a loss? So Beis Hillel is one who's concerned about Simchas Yom Tov and not Beis Shammai. Almagab Simchas Yom Tov, Beis Shammai dismisses it, and Beis Hillel takes it into account. And yet, the very I have a question from the very first Mishnah. The same question that Beis Shammai is one who allows you to shecht and cover the blood because he's worried about Simchas Yom Tov. So what's going on here? Therefore concludes based on this question that you have to swap around Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. That Beis Shammai is the one who says that you could place the hide on the ground to make sure that we don't disturb the Simchas Yom Tov. Beis Hillel is one who bans it. So again, I have no problem. I don't know what your question is. Why swapping names around is the last resort? First of all, let's go to our first Mishnah. It's not a question of Simchas Yom Tov. He just holds no issue there. Knows the shovel's already stuck into the sand. If there wasn't, he would never have allowed it, even though the Simchas Yom Tov. That's number one. And on the other hand, Beis Hillel over here is strict. Why Beis Hillel is lenient, not because of Simchas Yom Tov, and therefore he says, no, Simchas Yom Tov, let's let him shech. And even though he's going to do something with a hide, doesn't matter. We want to make sure he shechs the animal. It's not the reason why at all. Because the chazi lemizga aleyo, because Beis Hillel says that they used to put leather on the ground. They would sit on it, and they would place on the ground, and they would put the knees on it, and that's how they would sit. In other words, it has a use already the way it is right now. So therefore, when you're spreading it out on the ground, even though people are trampling on it, it has a purpose other than people trampling on it, that people can use it for Yom Tov as a tablecloth. So therefore, and people crouch on the ground and they eat from it. So therefore, it's nothing to do with Simchas Yom Tov, and therefore we're worried about it, and that's why we're going to suspend some of the law. Don't do that. It's because the way it is right now on the ground, it still has a use. I will have some light. But in the case of the shovel, no. Eli kasha, if you have a question on Beis Shammai, still the contradiction, kasha, this is perhaps a question. Beis Shammai says that they used to have these cabinets where they used to store all their spices and everything else, and then they have these doors, and they would remove the doors, and they would use the doors as a showcase, and showcase all of their products on this door. And the question is, if you could take it off and put it back on Yom Tov. Even though you don't do sales on Yom Tov, but if you could go into a store and buy it on Yom Tov, don't talk about price or anything else till after Yom Tov. So the question is, if you're allowed to remove these doors on Yom Tov and put them back in, is it like building or not? And so because the law, we'll see later, the law by Yom Tov is you're allowed to go into a store that knows you and take merchandise You don't mention at all price or anything else, and then after Yom Tov, you're sitting record. So the Gemara Beshamai says, "Ein misalkin es atreishim Yom Tov." You cannot remove the doors on Yom Tov. And Beis Hillel matiri, not only to remove them, but aflahach to put them back, and I don't treat them as building. Alma, and we think right now, it's one thing to take them off the door, but putting it back is definitely not necessary for Yom Tov. Taking it off, putting it out there because people who need some of this spices, let's say for Yom Tov, but putting the door back, why is Beis Hillel allowing that? It must be the only reason he's allowing that is because if you're not going to allow him to put it back, neither will he take it off, and then people will want to have spices. People who need spices for Yom Tov won't find them, so we're worried about Sifras Yom Tov. So here we see Beis Hillel is worried about Sifras Yom Tov, and he makes special allowances, even though Api Halacha is questionable. And yet the first Mishnah we see it's the other way around. Hill is the one that says that you cannot, shech and dig, use a shovel to dig up sand to cover the blood. Okay, so therefore, Alma Gabe Simchas Yom Tov, when it comes to Yom Tov, he's very worried. He doesn't care about Simchas Yom Tov, the fact that you're building something, therefore it's forbidden. And Beis Hillel, even though Beis Hillel might hold there's no such thing as building when it comes to pots and pans, it's only when it comes to permanent edifice. But it's a bother, it's a tircha, an unnecessary tircha. And the only reason why he allows it is because he's worried that next time you won't do it at all in the first place. But we have a question from our first Mishnah. So we understand. Beisham is not a question. It's not because he's concerned in our Mishnah about Sichos Yom Tov. He allows you to use a shovel. Hasam, the ikot dekanos. The shovel's already sitting in the sand. And hachal leka dekanos. Here there's nothing prepared. Fine. But Beis Hillel kasha. I got a problem with Beis Hillel. The first Mishnah, Beis Hillel is not worried about Sichos Yom Tov at all. And here he allows you to put the doors back because otherwise next time you won't take it off in the first place, and people the Sichos Yom Tov will be diminished. Kasha. So therefore, based on that question, that's why Rabbi Yechon said, you know what? Let's swap around the name. But Hill says you're not allowed to put the door back, and Shammai says he can. Says the Gemara who said. Abdullah said there's nothing compelling here because I can still argue leave the Mishnahs intact. How you going to explain Basil why over here suddenly so worried about Sichos Yom Tov and in our Mishnah he's not? It's very simple. Not because he's worried about Sichos Yom Tov, because he holds there is no issue with putting the doors back. What do you tell me? It's like construction, it's building. He holds there's no building when it comes to utensils. There's no such thing as building when it comes to vessels, nor is there a concept of collapsing or destroying when it comes to vessels, which we had a Gemara Shabbos. We'll have it later as well. But over there, there's no compensation. So therefore, he asks you to shech the animal and dig up the sand. Nothing to do with Sichos Yom Tov. As you want further, Mishnah. Beishamai, this entire Pedic is full of Beishamai and Beis Hillel arguments. Beishamai says, Lo yito. Beishamai says, okay, we're talking about the birds now. You want to organize to take the birds. You should not take any of the birds on Yom Tov, unless but you actually prepared it. You prepared it before Yom Tov. We're talking about now, okay, in a case where you have a ladder, you're climbing up, and it's pivoted against the Sashevich. And the only time you're allowed to take birds are you already prepared before Yom Tov. And we'll soon see why that's necessary. But still says you don't have to physically pick up the birds to prepare before Yom Tov, then let them back in their nest. But you have to stand thereby and point, and you say, these are the ones that I am going to use. These are the ones that I'm going to take for myself for Yom Tov. Okay, says the Gemara. The whole machlekes is bebricha rishona. It seems that every year when the bird, lays its eggs and lays chicks, the first two it has this attachment to. Anything beyond that, it has no attachment to. So Rav Chana says we're only talking about the first birds that there's an attachment to the mother bird, and then because we're worried that Rabbi Shammai is worried that if you don't go physically and do something to show that you're ready to shecht it, let's say you see these birds and you see how lovingly the mother looks at it, you're not going to have the guts to take the birds. You're going to change your mind. And you can take other birds which you haven't designated a muktzah. So therefore, Rabbi Shammai says you have to physically take the birds in your hand, and sort of when you take them in your hands, then that means you showed already you did an act to show there's no compassion there. You plan to shecht them tomorrow. So you might change your mind, and therefore you bothered yourself for no purpose at all. However, if you took them out before Yom Tov and you shook them, and you said this is what you physically took them in your hands, so you said I'm going to use it tomorrow for shechting it, so it shows that you have no rachmanis. But still, how legas in it, we're not really worried. But the second group, a lot of the rest of the birds, even hackle, everyone agrees like Hillel, but I mean, the reason why you have them there is Shech. So we're not worried about any particular compassion. Well, Beis Hillel, so what's the question? According to Beis Hillel, why do we need him to designate or even to say, I'm going to take and point, this is the bird I'm going to take and that we're going to take? Why do you have to do that at all? Okay, he doesn't have to physically take in his hand, but he still has to stand there and say and point at the birds. What for? Why don't we use the principle of Yesh Breda? You say, look, I'm thinking I'm going to use 2 or 3 birds, and then tomorrow you say whichever birds that he selected, Yesh Breda, retrospectively, these are the birds that he wanted all along. Why does Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel, as we're going to discuss, believes in the principle of Yesh Breda? Not everyone does, but Beis Hillel does. So therefore, what's the issue? Well, Beis Hillel, why in the world does he have to say, I'm going to take this bird, take that bird? Let him say, I'm going to take birds from this particular nest tomorrow, and that's enough. And tomorrow, whenever it comes along, whatever he took is the one that he always wanted. So if you're going to tell me no. Maybe Beis Hillel Leslie Breda, maybe Beis Hillel doesn't agree with the principle of Breda, and therefore, if you're going to think I'm taking 2 birds here, and then tomorrow you take other birds, and that's why it's a problem, and because you don't need all the birds, you'll say you only need 2 birds. So therefore, because if you don't hold Ein Breda, that's what you have to say. Zev point, these ones I'm taking. But we know that Beis Hillel does believe in the principle of Yesh Breda. And how do we know that? From the laws of Tumah. We know the laws of Tumah, we have a thing called an oil. So if you have a corpse in one side of the room, everything else that shares the same common roof becomes tummy as well. The tumah gets passed on, right? That's laws of oil. Then we have a doorway. The doorway that you were planning to take the mace out of becomes part of the house, even though it's outside of the door. And what do you call the doorway itself? Everything that's there becomes tummy because the mace eventually will go out there. What about it has many doorways, but you haven't decided yet which doorway you're going to take it out from? So it says in the Mishnah here, a mace, there's a corpse in the bayis in the house. Let's say there's a number of doors leading out of this particular house or room to the outside, and they're all closed or they're all open, makes no difference. Kulon Tameim, all the doorways are tamei. It means that any vessel sitting inside the doorway or on the threshold becomes tamei. If they're under the ceiling of that doorway, even though it's outside of the house, because the mace eventually is going to come out through this door or through any one of these doors. So the chachamim, so it's not from the Torah because it's not really part of the house. It's out when you close the door; it's on the other side of the door. The chachamim will go that wherever eventually you're going to lead the mace out from, then that area becomes tamei as well. And since we don't know which door you're going to use because you haven't made a determination, all the doors are asur. Rashi elsewhere said that it's actually mahatorah that the doorway becomes tamei. But anyway, let's continue. What about niftach echad mehem? After the person passed away, one of the doors opened up. Then hu tamei. Then only the kelim found in that doorway is become tamei. The kulon Torah, the rest of the doors are Torah according to everybody. Why? We're talking, what do you mean, why the rest of the Torah? The door was only opened up after the mace. What about the first few minutes? So talking about any kalim that you're going to bring, as Gemara will say later on, any kalim you're going to bring into that doorway after you determine that that's your doorway, that doorway itself becomes now tamei. So anything after you made that determination becomes tamei. The kulon Torah. What about chishik? You only thought. You thought about using one of the doors, using a window that has, a cavity in the wall that's 4x4, so it's a significant opening. Then matzeles are kol apsochim kulon base. The Mishnah says a sort of a vague statement. All the other doors are all right. Now, all you did was so far you thought about it. How far do we take this thinking about it? What exactly happened? The Shammai says, when did you think about it? It had to happen before the person died. So therefore, you already designated that as a door. But if you had thought about it afterwards, it's too late. They don't say breda. So therefore, the first hour, let's say you didn't know which door, finally made a decision. Anything during that first hour, all the doors are tamei. And then afterwards, this door becomes your doorway. And any future kalim are tamei only from this door, not the other doors. That's Shammai, because he doesn't believe in breda. But Beis Hillel says, Beis Hillel, even let's say an hour after the person passed away, he said, "No, this will be my door." Then we will say that even the kalim that were sitting during that hour and any of the other doorways will be tar, and this is the only door that's worried because we'll say, yes, breda, it's retrospective or retroactive, and therefore all the other doors were never a doorway for this mace. So we see clearly hill holes and the county is greater. So why in the case of the birds does it have to designate which bird is going to take? Says the Gemara. Because right now the Gemara thinks we're talking about not just the kalim you're going to place in this doorway after you've designated it, but even the kalim you place in the doorway before you designated it, but after the corpse was there. Says the Gemara, but that's not a question. Hillel does not believe in Breda. That's why in our Mishnah he has to designate the bird and say Zebazeh and Inoitel. In the case of the corpse, you misunderstood. We're not talking about the kalim that were there prior. We're talking about the kalim there post. But Rab himself says the ties of Sochem Kan Haba. They're only arguing about the door, about the kalim from now on. That Beis Hillel says, look, any kalim from now on, all the other doorways are all right. It's only this particular doorway. And Beis Shammai says no. Beis Shammai says that once a doorway became tamei, during that hour after the person passed away, until you determine which door, all the other doorways became tamei. Once it became tamei, the tumah doesn't leave unless you physically do something. It's not just a decision which door we're going to use. You have to actually break out a new door. That ma'isa breaking out then cancels the tumah of all the other doors. A thought does not cancel. So we're not talking about retrospectivity. We're talking about here about the future. The ties of Sochem Kan Haba. Mekan Haba only what the keli you put from now on, and not about the past. So that's the first answer. Beis Hillel does not believe in the principle of Breda, and that's why you have to designate the birds. However, Rava says, I could say that in the case of the mace, we're talking about even not just from now on, but also the past. And Beis Hillel does believe in Breda. So why does he still have to then determine which birds before Yom Tov he's going to use? He has to say Elu, he has to say Zeh v'zeh and Inoitel. Why? Because this is what we're worried about. If you don't prepare beforehand, you say which birds I'm taking, we're scared. Okay, you'll come on Yom Tov. You're going to take two birds in your hand, and you'll say, okay, Breda, this is what you want all along. But then you have a good look at it. Say, there's better birds sitting further inside the nest, and you're going to put them aside and go for other ones. So that means all along that what? These weren't the ones that you chose. If these weren't the ones that you chose, then you just moved a tircha for absolutely no purpose. And that's what we're worried about. That's why we want you to designate it beforehand. Meanwhile, you took birds that you weren't suitable at all. So in whatever Ahmed you say, you yourself say that I don't have to stand there physically pick up the birds before Yom Tov. I can just stand a bit distant from the place, and I don't have to physically pick up any birds. I just look at the birds and I point which ones I want. And I mean, I didn't really pick up the birds and choose what I'm taking. So what's the difference? How do we, if that's what your concern is, what does it help? What's the benefit of standing there before Yom Tov and saying, Zev is in April? Since you didn't pick it up, you might change your mind again. Because comes Yom Tov, when you get closer and you pick them up. Says the Gemiri, Hani millimeter of Yom Tov, if we're going to force you to Erev Yom Tov, go ahead, designate the words, and you say which ones you want, then you know, why am I doing it before Yom Tov? Obviously, the rest of the birds I cannot take. So you're not going to change your mind because you know the rest are muktzah, because you didn't prepare them. By telling you, to ordering you to do it before Yom Tov, that in itself is a safeguard. Then you're not going to touch any of the other birds. You're not going to change it because of muktzah. I will do Yom Tov, but on Yom Tov itself, if you're going to go ahead and say, well, okay, go ahead and choose on Yom Tov, is zimnin the mishtachir shmanim kechushin chushin shmanim ukemetal to middle chazale. But on Yom Tov itself, if you didn't say anything before Yom Tov and you forgetting over there, you have a look and you think, oh, these birds are no good. So the first birds you picked up, you thought were good, and then upon closer examination, you see it's no good. You're going to swap the other birds without realizing what you just did, and now you had muktzah in your hand. Inami or zimnin occasionally the mishtachli kuluk. What happens that you picked up and turned out to be the old chushin v'shavugu on Yom Tov? You thought you'll go to this nest, and then when you if you didn't do anything before Yom Tov, you go to this nest, you start picking up the birds, and you see each bird they're so lean, there's nothing there, and you're not for us Yom Tov. As a result of that, because you didn't prepare anything, you don't have anything for Yom Tov. And we're worried about Simchas Yom Tov. But if you tell you before Yom Tov, then you'll accept whatever it is that you have already. Okay. Continuing the birds, what happens? So you set aside, or you thought in your mind, I want these black birds. But then on Yom Tov, you came to the nest, they're all white. All of them, you chose white bird. The nest is full of white birds, and then the following day, you find they're all black. So we can assume they're not the same birds that you set aside, so you can't use them. Or what happens We had this, the next few cases in the Mishnah, we actually had Psachim Daf Yud. You put down 10 pieces of bread and you found them 9, you found 11. What assumption should we make? Is it only a problem of one or is it a problem of the entire 10? So we have a similar thing here. Shnayim, you set aside 2 birds, shleish in the nest, and suddenly you found 3 birds in the nest. The question is it only one additional bird? Or all the birds are different? It doesn't matter. Asurim. All of these cases, asur. Because even in the case of 2 and then 3, as it stands now in the Mishnah, it seems it's asur because we'll assume it's a whole new set of 3 birds. However, and the Gemara will soon explain. However, shloishim or tashnaim, if let's say there were 3 birds there when you were there Yom Tov and now you found 2, we have 2 possibilities. Either all 3 flew away and there's 2 new ones, so therefore you can't use any of them, or just one of them flew away and there's 2 remaining, and then there's no problem. Mutarim, it is permitted, because that's the assumption we're going to make, that the original 2 are still there. But let's say when you were there at Yom Tov, the birds were inside the nest. Then you found them outside. There's a board, where they walk around in front of the nest. And you look inside the nest, there's nothing there, and now there's birds in front of the nest. The question is, are these the same birds or some other set of birds? Is asurin, they're us. But the im ain sham elahim, with 3 birds in the nest, and now there are 3 birds walking around, no other birds around, then we'll assume these are the same ones. They're permitted. Says the Gemara, let's start from the beginning of the Mishnah. You start off, you designated white, you found black in the nest of the white. Pshita, obviously it's not the same ones. You know what we're talking about here? In this chicken coop, you have a number of nests, right? A number of cavities in the chicken, a number of windows, of spaces, and you have different nests. So what happened was, the nest on the right was the white ones, the nest on the left was the black ones. But when you came on Yom Tov, it was the other way around. The birds you have the black now on the right and the white on the left. And the question is, are they new sets of birds or do we just assume that they made a swap? So it says the Gemara, that's the Chiddush. We woke up first thing in the morning, Yom Tov, and found black, the white. White, black. I would have thought, we should permit it because probably it's the same birds, just they swapped, nests. Maybe the same bird, they just swapped where they were staying. That doesn't work that way. We're going to assume that they don't really swap the nest, and therefore we're going to assume that this is a different set of birds and you cannot use it. The original birds all flew away. These are new ones. So if we're going to assume they're new ones, so you have a choice. We're going to have a more robust an interesting Chanina says about a case where when you don't know what to do something, you look at the majority. And we have another rule that sometimes you look at what's the closer proximity. What about you have a roiv and a karev? The majority gives you one direction, but the karev tells you another direction. Which one should you follow? Here you have a case, the majority of the birds around the world were not designated by you. But the ones that are right next to the nest that you designated are right near karev. So you have the rule of roiv versus the rule of karev. Which one should you follow? And you're telling me you cannot assume the birds next to it are the same birds. In other words, we're going to follow the majority of the world. So here we can resolve Rav Chanina's question that roiv overrides karev. Says the Gemara, Leimer Sayel, we approve Rav Chanina. I'm Rav Chanina, roiv the karev, halech achar haroiv, go after the majority. Says the Gemara, Kedamar Abai, like Abai says, Bedaf. Abai says that we're talking about over here that there is a board. There's a board in front of the shayvich that's protruding, and there birds from all over the world come, and therefore it's not just roiv around the world. Actually, the roiv are karev as well. Birds that come in for a few minutes, like on those telephone wires. You see many times birds are sitting there and resting before they move on, and they don't go into the nest because they don't feel comfortable. It's not their home, or because the birds inside the nest chase them away, shoot them away. And therefore, what our concern here is that maybe the bird that entered now, all the other birds left, and the birds that are sitting on that board are the ones that entered this one. So the roiv is not from a distance, the roiv is karev as well. And that's why it is forbidden. Says in the next case, in Mishnah Shnayim, there were 2 birds and now you found 3, it's asur. Why is it asur? Because manashach. If the 2 original birds are gone and now these are 3 new birds, of course it's asur. They're different birds. Even if you're going to say, look, the 2 are still there. It's just a new bird, fine. But now you have 3 birds, so you have 1 bird that you did designate and mixed with the other 2, and you don't know which one it is. There's one that's mixed in. Even though generally we have a rule of batel b'roiv, but when it comes to living animals, we don't apply the rule of batel b'roiv. We're having marazvachim. Or, as Taisa says, it's a davar sheyesh lematir, and wait till after Yom Tov, and you can do. And we said before the beginning of Gemara, anything which can be mutter tomorrow outright. Don't rely on the laws of bittul today. Okay, next case in Mishnah was Shloisha, the original was three, and now you found two. The original three, now you found two, is mutter. Now, why are they mutter? Because we're assuming the two is still the same as the original, and the third one is the one that flew away. It's not a new set. My timer, what's the logic? Hani inun, these are the same birds. The chadmenai ozlam, one of them sort of flew away. Even though normally we just said Dosh's Matin and we don't rely on coolers, but this is not just a leniency. This is such a compelling logic. You started out with three, now there's two. But Pashtas, the same two that were there before, are there now. Just one of them flew away. So L'chayda, this is not so simple, not so straightforward. Lema, let us say that Maslisin actually is involved in an argument, and our Mishnah seems to side with Rebbe, Rabban, and that's a problem because the halach is not like Rebbe, the halach is like the Rabbanon. The Tanya, an amazing concept. Rebbe wrote the Mishnayos, and he left the Mishnahs anonymous because he thought that's the halacha. When Rebbe has an argument on Chachamim, we expect the Rebbe's integrity, that he would leave the Mishnah anonymous, not according to his personal opinion, but according to the outcome of the halacha, which is to follow the rabbis. So therefore, we are wondering, why would this Mishnah side with Rebbe, even though Rebbe wrote it? Why would Rebbe when the halacha is not like Rebbe? Now, what's the story there? The story is as follows. Time we learned. What happens? He niach mana. A person, let's say, had what do you call it? He had money of Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is supposed to bring the produce with you to the Shalayim, but 10%, and the first, and second, and fourth, and fifth year. And but it's very difficult. So you swap it over into money. You exchange it for money, and you take the money to Yerushalayim. So you had money of Meiser Sheni, which you cannot use for any other purpose other than taking to Yerushalayim and buying food and eating it there. So you had Meiser Sheni money. You put $100 down of Meiser Sheni money in this box. And then the following day, whatever it is, you're ready to go. You found Masayim, $200 there. So the question is, what is it? Do we say the original 100 of Meiser Sheni is there, and you have 100 of Chulin, or do we say that none of the Meiser Sheni money is there because obviously someone had to go physically take it? You probably took the Meiser Sheni money, put it somewhere else. You just forgot, and you put other money here because people generally don't mix Meiser Sheni money and Chulin money. So the Gemara says here, we'll say Chulin or Meiser Sheni u'ravin zebazeb. We can say it's $100 of Chulin, $100 of Meiser Sheni money. So what do? So you pick up the $100 of better coins, and you say, Mamshach, if this is the Meiser Sheni money, great. And I'm taking away the other $100 to use my own purpose. And if it isn't, and that means the other money is the Meiser Sheni money, I'm going to swap the kedusha of the Meiser Sheni money to this money here. So this money will become the Meiser Sheni, and that becomes Chul. Taisus has a problem with that because he brings a Gemara that says you're not allowed to swap money to money. You take the fruits and you take the kedusha of the fruits and you transfer it to the money, but you cannot transfer the kedusha from one money to another money. So therefore, others learn that you take one of the money, you put it over to other fruits, and then you take the other fruits and you transfer the kedusha back to the good money. Okay, so Rebbe holds that we're going to assume the original 100 is still there, plus an additional 100. The Chachamim say no. Hakel Chulin. Chachamim say we believe that since you didn't, that it's more. You put 100, now it's 200. We're going to say that this is an entirely new 200, and the 100 that was originally there is gone, and you took it somewhere and went away, and therefore you just forgot. What about Hiniach Masayim? Because the case in our mission that we're talking about here is you had 3 birds and you found 2. Do we say it's the original 2 or not? So this is exactly the same case. Hiniach Masayim, you put down $200 there of Meiser Sheni money or but a matzah money, you found only 100. So but Rebbe says, Mana Munach, Mana Mutzah. Well, you put 200, there's still 100 there. Obviously, it's original money. Like in our mission, 3 birds, there's still 2 birds there. It's original birds. Leave it, Rebbe. Chachamim say, Hakal Chulin. The Chachamim say, no. We're going to assume that this is different money altogether. That all the entire $200, you put $200, and now you found 100. We're going to say the 100 is Chulin, and the 200 is somewhere else. So in the case of the birds, there were 3, now there are 2. We're going to assume that all the birds are gone, and the 2 here is the new birds. So now Mishnah rules that we don't make that assumption. Our Mishnah says you can go ahead with those 2 birds. So it means our Mishnah follows Rebbe. Why would that be? Says the Gemara, no. I feel If you want, I can say that our Mishnah sides with Rabbanon, and you cannot compare the case of Meiser Sheni money to birds, and why not? But each one Allah we learned Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Lezer, both Rabbi Yechon and both Rabbi Lezer. Which Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Lezer we'll see in a minute. They both say, Rabbi Lezer, they both say Tavayu, shiny goizlis, birds are different than money. By money, it was you who had to take the money out. You just forgot because money can't walk on its own. But when it comes to birds, they can walk on their own. So therefore, the Rabbanan made it. It's a good possibility, or more than a possibility, probability that just one of the birds picked us up and left. How would you know? But in the case of the money can't walk. So if you put down 200, that was 100, somebody had to take the original 100. And we'll assume, why would you take only 100? Why didn't you take both of the full 200? You probably did take the full 200 and you put it somewhere else. You don't remember. And this 100 that's here is a brand new 100, because we're trying to understand what, your psyche, which is very different case of the birds where they move around themselves. Because they all move about. That's what the Gemara answers. So therefore, there's no problem. Everyone agrees when it comes to birds, there were 3, now there are 2. It's probably the original 2. Says the Gemara. Now my question is all the way around. Why you even bother needing this answer that birds are different because they fly around? And you're going to use this answer according to everybody. According to them, as we'll soon see, at least according to one of them, definitely we can say the Mishnah works out according to Rabbanan, even without saying that birds are different. And how is that? But Allah, didn't we learn? We had an interesting argument regarding Maisa. How do they understand the argument Rebbe Rabban? So we made a contrast between if there was we said it was $200 and now you found $100. So there's an argument between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yechanan. You can have 2 possibilities: were the coins all loose, or we say this, were they all in one wallet, or were they in 2 wallets? One possibility is that you had 100 in one wallet and the other 100 in 2 wallets. That's called Shnei Kissen. And then we have this argument between Rebbe and one kiss now is missing. What do we think about the other kiss? But in the case where they were all together in the same kiss, everyone will agree that if you only found half the money there, then something's not right. It must be a different lot altogether. Or the other way around. And the whole argument is if it's in one kiss, in one wallet, you just take out half, another half is still original. But if it's 2 kisses, everyone agrees that if there was 200, 2 kisses, 200, and now there's only 1 kiss, definitely this is maybe the original. Says the Gemara, I will be kiss. Chadam, one of them says, B'shnei kiss and machlekes. The whole argument is only if you have 2 wallets. So do we assume that you left one, or you took both, and there's a new one? I will be kisech. If all the money is in one wallet, even hakol and everyone agrees, it doesn't make sense. There were $200 in one wallet, and you took out $100 and left the other 100 there. It doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? You only use them as a shame and go to Yisrael, to Yerushalayim. So therefore, we'll assume that you took that wallet of 200, put it somewhere else. It's a different wallet altogether. So everyone will agree by one wallet. And the Chadam, and one says, Bekis Achad, when it comes to one wallet, that's the machlek, is whether we assume this is the original 100 or not. Avol B'shnei Kis of 2 separate wallets, and one wallet is missing, everyone agrees that the other wallet is still the same. You put down 2 wallets, and one of those wallets is still there, still original. So, now we don't know who says what, but at least according to one who says Bishnei Kisin Machlekes, the one who says that by 2, our mission of birds is like 3 wallets, like different wallets. So the one who says that they're arguing when you have a number of wallets and one is missing, do we say that all of it is missing or just that one? Okay. And the Rabbanan say that we assume all of it is missing. Yet in our case, the birds, we say that 2 are still the original 2. So you have to give me an answer. Birds are different because they move about. And it says you have to answer Hachashayni Goizlas here, different Hoyel Vasilis, they jump about. But the one who says that the argument is only by 1 wallet, but by 2 wallets, everyone agrees. Whatever is left is the same. So even the Rabbanan would agree in the case of the birds, with 3 wallets, 1 bird's left, the other 2 are still original. Why do you have to tell me that birds are moving about? He's hashed to different now. Why did you have to answer that this answer could they move about? Didn't you tell us that when it comes to 2 wallets or 3 birds, there's no argument? Everyone agrees that whatever is left is from the original. Says the Gemara. Ravashi answers as follows: when we say 1 wallet and 2 wallets, when we say that the one who says that 1 wallet is a machlekes, we don't mean it necessarily 1 wallet for sure. Then we're talking that the one who says that 1 wallet, they're arguing whether we say there was 200 originally in the wallet, now there's 100, whether it's original or not, because it doesn't make sense that he took out 100 and left 100 there. We would take it. We're talking about 2 wallets that are like 1. In other words, there were 2 wallets. In both cases, 2 wallets, but 2 wallets that were tied together. 2 wallets means that they're 2 disparate wallets, and 1 wallet means 2 wallets that are tied together. So we're talking about the 2 wallets tied together. And therefore, if the 2 separate wallets, well, definitely everyone agrees, 2 separate wallets, if you found 1 wallet still there, we'll say it's original. But 2 wallets tied together, that's the argument. Do we say, look, they're tied together, there's like 1 wallet, and therefore it doesn't make sense that he took away 1 and left the other one, it's supposed to be a new lot? Or do we say, because at the end of the day, the 2 wallets, tied together, maybe he snipped it. and he separated the two, and therefore it's still part of the original. That's the argument. So in our Mishnah, we talk about the birds, we're talking about also the birds are tied together. And because the birds are tied together, it's like one wallet. So the question is, according to Rebbe, it makes sense only according to Rebbe, but according to Rabbanan, since the two birds are, they're tied together, if one is missing, then the other one's also missing. So we answer no, birds move around, so therefore they must have broken the knot themselves. Money can't break the knot itself. You had to tear the knot. So the argument is, did you or didn't you? But when it comes to the birds walk about, they fly, and whatever, and they have some pressure, then they broke the string. And that's what he's saying, that even the Rabbanan would agree in the case of the birds, it's quite possible one of the birds just broke away from the other two birds, even though they were tied together, broke away and flew away. The other two are the remaining ones. And therefore, it's like a case of two wallets, and everyone agrees that if one wallet is still there, it's part of the original. So, we're talking about birds that were tied. The kisim mikosharim and the wallet was tied as well. And that's what the Gemara says. Goizleis, even though they're tied together, everyone will agree that we'll assume the two birds are there, still remaining birds. But not hadodi, they ripped apart, they jump flying away from each other, and they're flapping the wings. Eventually, they broke through the ropes. So therefore, we're going to be lenient and say that one left and the two are still remaining of the original two. But when it comes to kis and wallets, they can't walk away on its own. If they were tied together, then logic, according to Rebbe, the logic says, according to the Rabbanan, the logic says that he would have taken both wallets. This must be another wallet together. Because Rebbe, no, it's still possible that he broke away one wallet, the other one's still there. Sometimes the misachel katrayu. And Rebbe holds that wallets also sometimes the unravels on its own. And maybe when he came to take the money, they weren't tied together. And that's what Rebbe's saying here. That maybe when he came to take it, if they were still tied together, it's like one wallet, everyone would have maybe agreed that why would he take one, not the other? But maybe they were separated. The rope, sometimes the rope unties by itself. But Rebbe holds, even though it happens less frequently in the case of the birds, I'll still treat it like two wallets, and whatever's left was left behind. Okay, we'll stop over here.